So, hello everyone, and welcome. We are super excited to have you join us today for our webinar on the Cloudbyz AI RegCheck Agent, which is also going to be your AI co-pilot for regulatory affairs. My name is Pooja Sood, and I'll be your host today as we explore how AI is transforming the way regulatory affairs teams prepare, validate, and submit dossiers with great speed, consistency, and confidence. We have a great session lined up, so let's dive in right in. So before we get started, a quick housekeeping items to ensure you have a smooth session with us. The session is recorded and a copy of it will be sent to your emails tomorrow and a copy would be posted on our website. To keep audio clear, all participants are currently muted, but we want to hear from you. So please use the Q&A section to submit your questions or the chat if you have any comments. Take all that during the sessions and towards the Q&A section around the end. To reduce distractions, please ensure your personal devices are on silent mode. And if you encounter any technical issues, please let us know in the chat and our team will assist you. Like I said, a recording of today's webinar will be posted on our website and emailed to all who have registered, but you can always visit www.cloudbyz.com or reach out to us at info@cloudbyz.com. Now, here is what we have in store for you today. We'll begin with an introduction to Cloudbyz and our speakers. Then we'll move into the Cloudbyz AI Innovation Lab, the engine behind what you'll see today. Next, we'll introduce the Cloudbyz AI RegCheck Agent and walk through key use cases. And then we'll close with a live demo of the product, followed by a dedicated Q&A session. Now let's meet our speakers joining us today. Firstly, we have Christopher Rowland, our product manager here. He brings deep hands-on experience across clinical trial management, regulatory operations, and e-clinical technology. And he'll be walking us through the product today. You can connect with him at christopher.rowland@cloudbyz.com. Next, we have Taneer Das, who is our Life Sciences Solution Manager. Taneer leads the global pre-sales and specializes in translating complex regulatory and clinical workflows into compelling technology solutions. You can reach him at taneer.das@cloudbyz.com. And I'm Pooja Sood, your host for today. You can connect with me at pooja.sood@cloudbyz.com. Now let's kick things off. For those meeting Cloudbyz for the first time, we are one of the fastest growing providers of AI-enabled e-clinical solutions. Our platform is 100% cloud native, which offers scalability and modularity to suit your specific business needs. We empower organizations from Fortune 500 leaders to agile startups to streamline the trials lifecycle and deliver life-saving therapies faster to market. Our comprehensive suite covers the entire clinical spectrum, including CTMS, CTFM, EDC, ETMF, and safety and pharmacovigilance. Through our AI Innovation Lab, Cloudbyz integrates advanced intelligence directly into the trial lifecycle to automate complex tasks and enhance decision making. As part of our AI Innovation Hub, this year we have launched the AI ETMF agent, which automates document filing, metadata capture, and quality checks to ensure your trial is always inspection ready. We've also brought AI into CTMS monitoring and ClinTranslate AI, which provides a seamless, secure translation layer that empowers human translators by understanding clinical terminology across global studies. And today we will look at our latest, the AI RegCheck Agent, through the slides. We are proud to be ISO 9001 and 27001 certified and fully compliant with global regulations, including FDA 21 CFR Part 11, GCP, and HIPAA. Cloudbyz is featured in the Everest Group Speed Metrics as the major contender for both our CTMS and EDC products. We are headquartered in Chicago with our regional offices in Toronto and Bengaluru, we provide global support across all time zones. You could visit cloudbyz.com or email info@cloudbyz.com for more information. Now, without further ado, I'll hand over to Taneer.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pooja, for setting the stage with the introductions about CloudBiz. Before we kind of move forward, and dive into different scenarios that we have been, discussing, brainstorming to actually come up with this agent, let me first introduce, before the world, what the CloudBiz AI RegCheck Agent does. Well, at its core, this is an intelligent regulatory validation and checklist automation platform that we have designed to help regulatory teams stay continuously submissions ready. The platform that we have built automatically generates regulatory checklists, intelligently maps uploaded documents to submission requirements, validates completeness, and finally performs cross-document verifications across the entire package. Now, what's more important here is that this is not just a document management system, but it is also, or I would say, it is more importantly about creating a validation layer that kind of encompasses the entire submission process. So, instead of having teams manually, keep tracking spreadsheets and versions of documents and various gaps in those, the system that we have built here will continuously help identify missing requirements, inconsistencies, unsupported claims, and validation risks even before the submission is made. No, I would not really want to, spoil the fun by revealing all of our product features before Chris begins with the demo. So I would request the audience to, just wait a while longer for the live demo of the newly, the brand new agent that we have built. And oh yes, before we begin with the actual slides, just wanted to extend a sincere vote of thanks to the amazing minds at work at the Cloudbyz AI Innovation Lab who have built this agent. And in fact, they have many more exciting products lined up for release in the coming months as well. So yeah, thank you so much, guys. More power to you, and hopefully we will be able to do more such product launches in the coming months as well. Okay, so now let's now we will start with the discussions by discussing about one of the biggest operational challenges that exist in regulatory affairs today, and because whether it is whether you're having an IND or a PMA or a an AND or an NDA submission, regulatory teams are on a day-to-day basis managing an enormous volume of documentations, checklists, clinical evidence, CMC content, labeling information amendments, and whatnot, and all of these are moving simultaneously. And while each of these individual processes may work reasonably well on its own, the real difficulty arises when teams try to bring all of this together into one complete, aligned, and submission ready package. And that is exactly where we feel, and what we have heard is where the complexity starts to grow, because documents, they arrive from different departments and external partners, and with this the requirements also evolve from time to time. Versions may change, document versions may change, and these cross document inconsistencies that remain, they kind of become even difficult to detect as time progresses. And the teams, they often rely solely on spreadsheets and manual reviews and just their institutional knowledge to validate this readiness of the documents before they are put to submission. Challenge, as you can perceive, is no longer in just preparing the documents. The challenge is validating them at scale. The challenge is knowing the confidence that every requirement has. The challenge is to know the confidence with which you can ensure that every requirement has been covered, and every claim is supported and every module is aligned, and this entire submission is inspection ready even before the FDA or whichever regulatory body you are submitting to will begin its review. So over the next few slides, I will try to walk you through some very real scenarios that regulatory teams deal with today, and then explore what becomes possibly when AI is introduced into the process. Okay, so now let's begin with IND submissions, and honestly, this is where many organizations, they realize how fragmented regulatory preparations can become. And this is especially relevant for emerging startup and biotech companies or first time sponsors, because what usually happens here is that the submission process starts with people manually building checklists from scattered FDA guidance documents. Someone might just accidentally or may kind of by process download a few versions of 21 CFR Part 312 guidance, and someone else copies requirements into an Excel sheet. And very quickly, what happens in this mix-up is that the teams are already working with a certain amount of uncertainty and different versions of the same document. And the challenges, they just seem to grow from here, because we must not forget, while this is in progress, there are still new documents that are coming in from everywhere. Clinical teams sending protocol, medical affairs sending their investigational brochure, manufacturing sending the CMC data, and external CROs contributing to toxicology reports as well. And now, the regulatory team that you have is manually trying to map all of these files against the submission requirements. Now, what makes this process even harder is that usually there is no live visibility into the submission readiness. And what usually happens is, just a week before you're filing, your manager or someone from your leadership may just ask you that, hey, are we ready with the submission? And the answer is more so, more often it's an uncertain yes, or you might just be thinking of what just to say. And this is not because the team, the regulatory team that you have is not capable of doing this, but then it is because there is no real system validating the completeness of this package. And then adding to all of these confusion is also the cross-document inconsistencies, as I spoke of before. Well, you will have different protocol versions, those mismatches between summaries and protocols, and conflicting data or metadata rather that exists across these modules. Now, these issues are, from what we understand, incredibly difficult to detect to the to the naked eye and manually, because reviewers are typically validating these documents individually and not across the entire submission package in itself. So this is the problem that we have come to understand that exists for IND submissions. And now I would like to just paint the picture of like, if you could just imagine, like, if there's an alternative way of doing this. Now, say for example, if IND checklists were automatically generated from latest FDA guidance the moment the submission type was selected, what if the uploaded documents were intelligently mapped, or intelligently mapped themselves to the correct requirements, automatically identifying any missing gaps or unmet exceptions? Or say, what happens if the teams had a live readiness dashboard continuously showing the module status, the completeness percentages, and the unresolved validation issues? And most importantly, what if these cross document inconsistencies, which are very difficult to identify, were flagged before the submission review in fact happened, instead of the FDA finding it out later? And that's really the shift that we are really trying to talk about here, and the solution that we have built to kind of address this problem. Moving from a reactive submission assembly to a more proactive submission intelligence. Okay, so now we understand that IND submissions are challenging, but once we move from IND into PMS submissions, the complexity, as we can all realize and understand, increases significantly, because if for PMAs we are no longer dealing with only document completeness, we're also dealing with clinical evidence integrity at scale. So PMA submissions, as we might all agree, are incredibly data sensitive. And one of the biggest issues regulatory teams face here is confidence. Confidence that the package is actually complete. That is because most teams still rely heavily on spreadsheets and manually maintain tracking systems. So when your leadership comes asking what's missing, the teams often do not have a very precise answer. But then there is even a bigger challenge that comes from multi-site clinical evidence. Say, for example, you have a pivotal study that you're running across 6 or 7 sites, and each of these individual sites, they might produce their own reports. Then they might have integrated summaries that are created, adverse events that are consolidated, and finally the efficacy outcomes which are summarized. But then very rarely do we see that all of these individual data points are systematically cross-verified. So the discrepancies that are there in subject count, and that might also lead to inconsistencies in adverse event classifications or mismatched efficacy numbers that can quietly remain hidden until the FDA finally reviews them and kind of asks you a question. So now we all know that once those questions come from agency, the timelines to kind of manage this becomes even much more harder than it was before. And after this, there is also labeling. Say, for example, the intended use statements and the claims are often written based on the interpretation of the clinical data. But then, as we have seen, typically from our experience, there is no formal traceability connecting each claim back to its supporting evidence, which kind of creates even a greater risk around the unsupported PMA claims. And finally, we have amendments. PMA reviews involve multiple amendments over time, and after several rounds the organizations struggle to track which versions are superseding which other version, which document is the latest and the current one, and whether really the package in itself is internally aligned or not. So now imagine the alternative to this chaotic scenario that we just discussed. So, consider, having a system that is continuously validating this entire process, automatically cross-verifying multi-site clinical data across reports and summaries, claims, being directly linked to the supporting evidence, and every amendment automatically triggering revalidation of the impacted content. So instead of having teams reconstructing consistency manually, the platform continuously maintains submission integrity in the background, and that is in fact changing the very operating model for regulatory affairs from the way that it has been operating till now. Okay, so now as we all see that PMAs can be deeply complex. Now, when it comes to ANDA submissions, they introduce a different type of challenge altogether, which is not necessarily depth, but that of scale and repetition. Now we all know that ANDA submissions are extremely high volume, and one of the biggest operational burdens come from the variants, which have different strengths, different packaging configurations, and different dosage forms. And each of these variations they often require a checklist of their own. So teams might just end up repeating the same manual work over and over again. So, now the problem is that, once an error enters into the first checklist, that error will, quietly propagate across all the other checklists and multiply as well. And with this, if you add, the bioequivalence documentation in the mix, then you will have, missing endpoints, incomplete study mapping, and, maybe, overlooked requirements as well. And with all of this, you might just suddenly realize that the organization is facing a complete response letter from the FDA that could have been or should have been avoided, with earlier or preemptive, actions being taken. Now, additionally, CMC validation, particularly for NDA submissions, they add another layer of complexity due to, because of the stability of the data being questioned, the manufacturing process details that have to be explained, as well as the specifications that have to be detailed. Now, these are highly technical documents, and validating them manually is both time consuming as well as inconsistent. But then there is also apart from this the challenge of RLD changes that takes place during the review. The reference product labeling changes, and your team will just might just be struggling to identify which sections across the ANDA package are now getting impacted, and due to all of these factors, the downstream revalidation becomes more of a reactive process instead of a controlled process. So, here is what we are proposing as Cloudbyz. So imagine, if we have a variant specific checklist that was automatically generated based on the exact product configuration. Like, what if the bioequivalence validation happened during the upload itself? What if CMC gaps were proactively flagged with remediation visibility before the submission happened? And what if, the RLD labeling updates automatically trigger impact analysis across affected documents and submission sections? Now, this is exactly what our AI ships are, this is exactly what our AI tool is, looking to address, and, how we are trying to shift from the present reality that we have, and trying to reduce the risk of, the regulatory submissions as well. And now, so we finally arrive at one of the most operationally demanding regulatory pathways of all, the NDA submission. And NDA is not just a submission, if you really think of it in that way. It's probably the culmination of years of development, years of clinical work, research, manufacturing, and regulatory coordination. And now hundreds and sometimes even thousands of documents will need to come together into one coherent CGD package. And just wanted to put it out there that the challenge from what we have seen starts surprisingly early. Regulatory teams will spend manually will actually spend weeks manually creating NPA checklists from APA guidance documents, ECDD specifications, and therapeutic area requirements. And even after all of that effort, the checklists might still contain gaps, or might have outdated references. And then, comes along the problem of document mapping of clinical reports, non-clinical summaries, CMC packages, and labeling content, all manually mapped into CTD modules using spreadsheets. And at this scale, manual control, simply becomes difficult, as we can all imagine. But, for NDA submissions, perhaps the biggest risk here, as we, might think, comes from, again, the cross-module inconsistencies. You might just have a module 2 that says something and module 5 that says completely different. Labeling language says something slightly different, to these two modules. And individually, it might just so happen that each document may appear correct, but then, when the FDA reviewers, review your package, they do not review in silos, they review the entire submission. And that is when these inconsistencies they surface up. And finally, there is the inspection readiness, which organizations often rely on emails, folder histories, and manual review tracking to explain how the submissions were assembled. But during inspection, reconstructing that history becomes extremely difficult, as you might. So we have an alternative approach to this. Think of a solution where you will have an automated checklist generation aligned with current FDA guidance, intelligent CDD module mapping, automated cross-module consistency checks across efficacy claims, dosing information and labeling, and every reviewer action, validation event, and mapping decision is captured in a fully traceable audit trail. So basically, the inspection readiness becomes, built into the process itself rather than something that the teams have to prepare for later. Okay, so now, what we did was, we discussed about all four submission pathways, and the underlying theme for each of them is actually very consistent, which is that the issue is not that regulatory teams are lacking expertise. The issue is that the process itself has become too manual to scale, reliably. And that actually brings us to this particular slide where we discuss about the value proposition behind the AI RegCheck agent. So, let's just take a step back and look at the broader picture. The traditional, submission process starts breaking in these three areas, namely, which are the speed, the quality or the accuracy of the submission, and the cost that it takes. Now, as submission volume grows, the teams start adding more spreadsheets, more reviewers, more manual coordination, but the process doesn't necessarily become more reliable by the addition of such resources. In fact, with all of the new additions, the variability also keeps on increasing. It might just so happen that one reviewer checks something one way, another reviewer might check it differently. Cross-document verifications get skipped because the timelines are tight, and inspection preparation becomes more of a reconstruction exercise. Now compare that with an AI-assisted validation tool, where you will have checklist creation drop from days to in fact minutes or even seconds. Document mapping becomes automated and available with confidence codes, and cross-document checks happen systematically for every submission. And finally, the audit readiness also becomes embedded into the workflow so that you can check it at any point of time as you need. So the real value that Cloudbyz, what we are proposing here is not just the automation behind the tool, but also a certain amount of standardization. We're trying to create a submission process that scales with software intelligence instead of scaling linearly with headcount and adding to your operational expenditure. And that is, the most important shift for the future of regulatory operations that we have kind of envisaged and, what we have thought about before building this tool. So the value does not stop only with the regulatory affairs team alone. Before the submission readiness impacts stakeholders, like because because the submission readiness does not only impact the regulatory affairs team, it also impacts other stakeholders across this organization. Now, based on the points that I've put up till now, we all understand that regulatory affairs teams benefit immediately through faster checklist creation, improved readiness visibility, and reduced manual validation effort. But then the quality and compliance teams also gain something equally important. There is transparency. Every validation activity, reviewer action, and compliance checks becomes traceable and auditable. Clinical and program teams benefit because the documents become become better aligned with submission requirements much earlier in the process, which means that you will have fewer late stage surprises and fewer submission delays. And finally, for the CROs, this also creates a very interesting opportunity because AI-enabled validation workflows can significantly accelerate delivery timelines while also creating competitive differentiation in the market. So ultimately, what we are seeing here is not just another automation tool, but what we are seeing is the emergence of AI-assisted regulatory operations, where submission intelligence, validation, and compliance readiness becomes continuous capabilities instead of being last-minute activities. So, with that, I would now like to kind of make a transition and hand it over to Christopher for a live demonstration of our newly built agent. Thank you.
So I'll be going through our demo for our AI RegCheck agent today. Can uh can someone confirm that my screen is sharing?
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you. So this is the main landing page and dashboard for our agent, where you'll be presented with some information, just kind of at a glance, with how many submissions you have, how many have been approved, any that you've been recently working on, and on the side we'll see a bar for navigating through the system. But let's talk about what this agent actually does and how it functions if we click on new submission. And as we kind of talked about through those presentation slides, how this system works is it really boils it down to creating, document checklists based on your submission type, using the power of AI to compare that checklist and the documents within that checklist with various guidelines and regulation requirements, and then provide you real-time metrics on how your submission is going. So for today's submission, I'm going to create uh, a NDA packet based on ECTD4 guidelines set forth by the FDA that are built on ICH guidelines. And I'm going to have a due date for this with the next quarterly review by the FDA. And we're going to go ahead and generate this packet. We'll see if that's completed. And it'll show up in our recent submissions where we can click in and have a detailed breakdown of everything to do with this packet. So at the top, we'll see how many documents we need to, or how many sections we need to complete, how many are compliant and review, missing, rejected. We'll also have some additional information on this packet as a whole, such as the requirements. We'll be able to see all of the documents we've uploaded as we go through today's demo, an audit trail for my actions or my team's actions, and then an AI audit trail letting you see both of those. And for the NDA submission packet, when we selected that option and created this new submission, we've been provided the scaffolding of the 5 key modules for this submission. This first one is a lot of like administrative stuff with like FDA forms, different certifications, different financial disclosures, things like that. You'll also get a description of these different items, um, what type, whether they're mandatory or optional, and then the status. And when it comes to actually filling in this checklist, you have multiple different options depending on how you want to do this. So you could just come in here and click on an item, say you have this this certification and you want to add it, and you could just click upload and do it that way. The other option that you have, which I think is a lot faster, especially when starting this checklist, is actually going through upload documents. And it'll give you the option of not just a single PDF, but also a zip or bulk folder. So you can upload mass documents at once. And if we actually click on that upload, I can click into this regulatory example, and you'll see that we have all of the different modules, different folders in here, but I have this in just a zip folder, and it will actually extract all of those folders, all those documents, and analyze them in itself. So it doesn't just need to be in like a basic format. It can work with folder structures as well. And then it'll take just a moment for the AI to provide just a quick analysis of all of our documents. And what this will now do is look at them and decide where they think it should go and provide a confidence interval for its place. It'll also flag any documents that it can't locate, or whether that's maybe the title or the information just doesn't match, or maybe you've included a document that doesn't need to be included in the submission. And you'll be presented with an option of either assigning it yourself and saying, oh, this is actually a case report form, and it'll show that it's now been manually added. And then once you have looked through all of your documents and felt comfortable and confident that, yes, this is everything that we need and it's looking in the right place, you'll be able to send it in for confirmation and validation. And it's just going to tell me that those 6 files that we hadn't mapped are just going to be skipped and not included in the submission packet. And it's going to take a moment to process this and actually review it. And so while we're doing that, we can navigate through the system and kind of look at some other parts of it. So going from the dashboard where we started, we can now go into checklists, and we'll see all the different ones we've been working on. Right now we're working on this ibuprofen one that we can see is processing. We can also see a number of other different types of submissions, who they've been created by, their compliance, their status, and when their deadlines are. We can also edit or delete any of these. We want to change like the title or anything like that. We will also have access to our documents section, which will have all of our different documents that we have uploaded into the AI checklist, documented here. We can see exactly what they are, what module they were uploaded into, and for what submission packet. We'll be able to see what their final status was. And if we want, we can also view them. So say, we want to use it as a reference, we can come in here and see like, what was this, what does this form look like, or how was it submitted? And then lastly, if somebody has permissions for this, there will also be an approval queue where they'll be able to actually, that person can review and approve or request changes for a submission. And with that, we're actually going to now navigate back to our checklist where we can now see that it's been reviewed. We have 2 that are ready for review, 12 that are missing, and 9 that have been rejected. Our status has also been updated to in review, and we've gotten a few more options available to us, including submit for approval or view validation. And we're going to start with viewing our validation, where it's going to give us a score on our overall compliance and list out issues that the AI has identified with our documents. And we're going to start with this one here at the top with some basic information. It'll automatically show us that we have 2 documents that are non-compliant and 5 that need review. It'll show us a description of the issue per the guidelines and a short blurb on what it's seeing in that document. And we can actually click on this and we can go to this non-compliance one, and it will take us to the page where that issue is. So we can check in this one that it wants a well-structured and unified document that synthesizes information, and then it'll provide an explanation on, okay, this part doesn't fully meet those requirements. You should probably make changes or corrections here. You'll also have some options when actually addressing these particular comments. So let's say for like this one that just needs review, I've reviewed it and I actually, I've found that I'm okay with this error. I don't think that this actually needs to be changed. I can just override the failure or change it to a pass, provide a justification, and submit. If on the other hand, I feel like that this is actually an error on the system's part, and for whatever reason it flagged this, even though like I disagree, like it actually does meet guidelines, I can report this issue as, say, a false positive and tell it to pass this, and the system will actually learn from that information for future submissions that actually, whatever was different or wrong here is actually acceptable, and the system will adapt based on feedback. Additionally, if you're confused about any of these issues, what we can do is we can just copy and paste whatever this issue is, and we can use our AI assistant up here in the corner and provide this. And it'll take a moment to process this error, but it'll provide an in detail kind of response for you, laying out what the issue is, where it is, and steps to correct it after just a moment. Here we go. And this is a lot more than just probably what you would see like through like a traditional chat, like chat AI or anything like that. This will work with the system and the information available. So it'll show you like what it's already told you about the problem. It'll show you where it's showing up. So what specific documents, if there are any others that had the same issue, it would pop up here as well. It'll lay out exactly what needs to be fixed within the document and make recommendations for next steps and how to fix it. Lastly, for the actual packet as a whole, you'll have some options for sharing or submitting this packet and providing updates. So we can export it, and we have 2 here at the top, Excel and PDF. And what this will do is provide you an overview of this information for the packet. So, how, what's missing, what's been rejected, and all of that within this structure, so that way you can share it with the team and let them know what things still need to be addressed or provided. You'll also have different options for your actual submission packet. So we have just a regular .zip that will pull it in these 5 modules and in this structure, or you can have XML or checksum as well. And then lastly, you'll have options for submitting to approval, which is just an easy process of just opening it, selecting who you want to approve, and sending it over to them for approval. And then they'll get an automatic notification that will not just show up here, but also in their email. And they'll be able to come to the approval queue, see it showing up, and then they can look in here. They'll be able to click in and look at the document themselves, see like audit changes, what the AI has done, and decide for themselves whether they want to approve it with notes or request some changes and provide notes as well, and then send it back to them. And that is the demonstration for our AI RegCheck agent today.
Thank you so much, Chris and Tanir. That was a really good presentation. We have quite a lot of time on our hand, and I see the couple of questions that were coming in. As part of our speaker panel, we also have the lead, our lead on our AI Innovation Lab, Archit Pathak, joining us as part of a speaker panel. So we can move on to the Q&A round, and please feel free to drop in your questions. We would love to have this open dialogue here, go over different other use cases that you have, any challenges that you're facing currently in your processes that we could discuss here as part of using the AI RegCheck. The floor is open.
Pooja, so there is a question I see on the chat, which is the NDA submission built from prior submissions in Cloudbyz, IND, P1 CSR, P2 CSR, EOP meetings, etc. Does Cloudbyz aggregate build essential documents over the life cycle of the development program through the NDA submission? So yeah, this is a really interesting question. First of all, yes, the solution is built based on our experiences with supporting our customers throughout their life, throughout our engagement with multiple customers and helping them with the submissions. And the solution is a result based on our learnings throughout the journey we have had. And that's where we are trying to consolidate everything. And as I mentioned in my message as well, so what we do as of now at this stage is help validate the aggregated checklist just before you actually go ahead and submit it, just as a review layer using AI as well. And this is where we basically try to help and deviate any, highlight any potential issues that might arise post submission and may result in any warning letters or stuff like that. So, not as a replacement at this stage, but more of as a co-pilot, which basically helps you, look at the finer nuances that would have been missed. Now, the system is, the AI is aware of the regulatory guidelines. So it is trained on the regulatory guidelines provided by FDA for all these kind of submissions. And of course, we are continuously expanding to other regulatory bodies as well globally. Making sure that the AI knows what kind of regulatory submission and what kind of regulatory body you're dealing with. And it actually validates against that specific regulatory body, not just FDA in general. At this stage, yes, it is just FDA. And to answer the other part of the question, does Cloudbyz aggregate build essential documents over the life cycle of the development program through the NDA submission? Not directly through this application, but there are, report generation capabilities and essential document build capabilities using the data that you store or you run using our eClinical application. So both of these combined. Now, of course, this solution that you just saw a demo, this is fully integratable with our eClinical application. So you don't have to explicitly, I mean, of course, for demo purposes, Christopher just showed upload how you can upload the document. That's just a feature. But if you enable the integration, the system can actually pull the documents in near real time from the eClinical system itself, where you can also have where you also have options to generate all these documents. So you generate the documents in eClinical and feed them directly over here. Or let's say if you're using some other system, we can figure out an integration pathway. But at this stage, we do not support document generation over if directly from this platform.
I hope that helps answer the question. Thanks so much, Archit. We have a bunch of more questions coming in under the Q&A tab. So we have a next question from Christine. Is import-export limited to Microsoft products, or are Google Docs, Slides, Sheets supported as well?
Well, yeah. So this is something that we are currently working on to have the ability to directly, open the documents or exports on using Google Sheets or Google Docs. But as of now, all the documents that you import are created in generic format. So if you directly just download it and store it in your Google Drive, you can open it, directly from any of the Google solutions. So the layout is still there. The ability to directly open it using Google solutions, it should be available in a very short span of time.
Thanks so much, Archit. The next one is, are electronic signatures captured in the Cloudbyz software? This is from Brett.
How's Sorry, can you repeat that question again, Pooja?
Yeah, it's, are electronic signatures captured in the Cloudbyz software?
Well, for e-signatures, this is not the right solution. This, as I mentioned earlier, the system is just to validate your checklist, basically generate a curated checklist from the latest updates and the guidelines. In case of any changes, this AI can actually let you know that, hey, there is there's a certain document that the FDA has actually, mandated or suggested to be updated in the coming quarter or something like that, so that by the time you are done creating your checklist and you're ready for submission, you know how many of your documents are already outdated, or AI can actually flag that, hey, there's a potential change observed in this document. Here's the updated link or some things like that. However, for e-signature, we have our Cloudbyz e-sign application, which is 21 CFR compliant, and uh, that is something that can be used to sign these documents. Now, given that all these solutions are built, are available from us, so a seamless workflow can be curated for auto routing the documents for signatures as well, but not on this platform directly, though. That's an add-on.
Thank you so much, Archit. And of course, since the main focus of this presentation was around AI RegCheck, but if you would like to explore our other AI products and the AI Innovation Lab, we would love to have you on a one-on-one call, and we can, take you through our other products as well, including the Cloudbyz e-sign.
Yeah.
And now, Archit, we have a bunch of more questions coming. So, how is the AI itself validated for regulated use, and what evidence can a sponsor show during an inspection?
Right. So as I mentioned, since this is this is developed from our experiences in the past while working with customers, and as of now, we are working with a couple of pilot customers to begin with, to make sure that whatever we have shown is actually something that is validated. The validation is still in progress. So far, we have already achieved, I believe, uh, 80 to 90% mark. There are certain things, certain aspects of the validation which are still in progress, and very soon we are going to close that as well. And uh, regarding the AI being validation, so we have our in-house validation team, and I believe some of them might even be present on this call. They are continuously, evaluating the entire build, the model, all the guidelines is, and especially the compliance aspect of regulated AI models. Uh, we have, based on, from the technical standpoint, or in terms of things like ISO 42001, and the AI, those things are something that has already been taken care of by our product team. For example, things like prompt versioning. That's one of the reason why Christopher was showing the AI audit trail, which is one of the most key aspect of validated AI solution, where the compliance actually demands that there has to be a persistent log of what the AI sees and generates. That's taken care of already. There are PHI checks. So in case your documents are having any PHIs, which technically is not applicable in this case, but that is something that is already the core. So these kind of basic features are already present. And as the compliance and validation teams find more issues, we are going to fix them as well.
Thank you so much, Arshit. The next question is, has Cloudbyz developed a plan to establish the credibility of the AI model outputs, such as credibility assessment plans, or included the human in the loop framework as recommended by FDA? Thank
That's
you.
right. So that's a very good question again. So human in the loop framework is, as I mentioned, is already in progress. So we have, very, very well defined product roadmap, and I'll be more than happy to discuss the upcoming, features with you one on one. It probably would be too much to discuss on this call. So feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to have dedicated sessions for you, where we can answer all your questions, show you around what's the plan, what's the next upcoming list of fixes or features, everything. And in terms of credibility reporting, so yes, we do have a credibility report available as well. As I mentioned, since we're already working with a couple of customers, so we have, we have the whole pipeline already defined, as and we can definitely have more discussions on them. Pooja, was there any other part to this question that I missed?
Um, no, I think you covered it. Yeah. Okay, so the next one is, does the agent comply to ICH guideline as FDA does align with ICH?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I just remembered. I'm sorry. I'll just take this question once again. The one other part regarding the previous question was the human in the loop framework. So as of now, since as you already saw the platform, we are not trying to take any uh, uh, decisions from this platform. So you're not going to submit anything. At this stage, the platform is just trying to generate that checklist and make sure that the the documents that you upload against those checklists are validated as per the FDA defined guidelines of ECTD version 4. And of course, we wanted to have the previous versions also available, but since FDA has already mandated version 4 anyways, starting April, so that's where we decided to just go ahead with ECTD version 4 at this stage. Uh, if there is a need, we can definitely, figure out a plan to enable a previous one as well. If any one of you are interested, we'd love to, have a detailed conversation with you. And that's where, as of now, human in the loop framework is built in, is inbuilt within the application. And you eventually, whoever is managing these submissions and on the platform has the final call. And the AI is just in a advisory state, I would say, where it just tries to help you by highlighting things that somebody would have missed. Okay. All right. I hope that answers your question. But yeah, please, again, as Pooja also mentioned, please feel free to reach out to us. These are some really interesting questions, and we'd love to have detailed conversation with you and see if we can, get you on the pilot phase as well.
Absolutely.
Uh,
And I know we have 10 more minutes to go, so we have two more questions to go. But if there are more, we can always take that up on a one-on-one call. So Archit,
Pooja, I think you asked a question. Sorry to interrupt. I think you asked a question about ICH guidelines or something. Uh, Just a second.
Just
Yeah,
check.
does the agent comply to ICH guidelines as FDA does align with ICH? So the answer is yes. This solution, as of now, as I mentioned, is tailor-made for FDA submissions. That's what we are targeting in this release. So it does follow all the ICH guidelines, and that's what the agents are trained on. Okay.
Okay.
When used, I'll take the next one, Pooja. I just saw the questions.
Good.
When the next one that I can see over here is when users override AI findings or mark false positives, how is the learning controlled so it improves the system without introducing compliance risk? Awesome. I was just hoping somebody would ask about this. So the system, what it does is the moment you mark a question as false positive or override, the system basically logs it per the checklist or in general. So imagine it as a uh, project context versus overall submissions context, right? So there are two stages based on which the agent decides whether this might help for other submissions as well, or the response that you're giving along while marking it as false positive actually makes sense only for this particular submission, right? So there is a reasoning going on in the backend, and it basically takes a decision on that aspect. So that's something that we are trying to tweak as well, so that we are, the agent is when it is taking that call whether to store it at overall compliance level, or sorry, overall org level or rule, or whether just to store it as a project level rule. And based on that, next time when you run a similar submission, when you generate a similar checklist, it will automatically have applied all the org level rules that you have curated over time. And again, for the project level rule, it kind of resets. Every new project starts from a clean slate. And as you keep working on the checklist, keep working with the system, you keep on enhancing it. So yes, right from the get-go, you might not see those things already happening. And this is one of the specific feature which we kind of built out of curiosity, because one thing that we have learned is even though the guidelines is and the processes are defined by FDA, every customer we have worked with still follow their own tailored, workflow. So this kind of gives you back that control, where you control how your system responds back or works on these uh, checklist that you're working on, and that gives you that special sense of relatability over time. But of course, as just like onboarding any new resource, treat these agents as new resources. They will definitely take some time to learn your ways of working, but it happens pretty fast. And that's one of the most interesting scenarios we had tested by tweaking all the different kind of scenarios per org.
Absolutely. And I know it was an amazing demo, Archit, when you showed me the product for the first time. And I hope we get to have more one-on-ones through this session with the participants who've joined today, that we can that we can continue this conversation forward. But I know we are just short of time, so we have two more questions, but I'll just want to take this question, Archit. So when users override AI findings or mark false positives, how is that learning controlled so it improves the system without introducing compliance risk? I know it kind of follows up with what you just mentioned, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. So this is the one which I answered, Pooja. Sorry, I didn't mark it as answered, I believe. Okay. So yeah, the learning basically happens as and when you use the system with over time. And of course, if you see a little bit of uh, let's say hallucinations, or let's say random people providing these overriding commands, or any of for marking something inaccurately as false positive, which may happen. You might end up doing it unknowingly as well. Let's say you wanted to mark something else and you selected that option on some other item. We do understand that. That's where we have a full-fledged RBAC in place, which is role-based access control. So you can actually restrict roles, or controls to specific users, so they can be held, accountable, and they make sure that these things are not done by anyone at random. And apart from that, there are ways where we can actually remove certain stored items as well from the system, so that AI can just skip that eventually. But having said that, as I also mentioned, if you do see a little bit of caveats during your conversation due to these kind of inaccuracies, over time that also gets rectified if you provide an updated response a couple of times. So there is overriding also available. Okay.
Thank Two more
Yeah,
questions.
who's the next one?
You want to take that
Yeah, go
up?
ahead.
Okay,
Sure,
so
I think. Okay, go ahead.
how accurate is the AI
So-
today? Give a quantifiable number. And then the next question was how much setup is needed before a team can actually start using it? And let these be the last two questions before we close up. So go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So, quantifiable number, I wouldn't quantify it at this stage. Again, as I said, it depends. It highly depends on how your workflow is and how well you are. Your team is managing the responses and tweaks. However, I can definitely say with confidence that when you initiate the system is when you get the brand new system, the AI agents are very well trained on the FDA guidelines. So you can definitely assume that when you upload a validated checklist, when you upload a checklist, we basically, the AI will follow the FDA norms and not your workflows. That, as I already mentioned earlier, happens with time, as in when you work more with the system. So basically, the more you use, the better it gets with time. Uh, and of course, since our team is already working on pretty complex ML models as well, not just solely relying on LLMs and the API calls. So we are very soon going to launch some major updates on how the system processes the overall documents, thus reducing the uh, you know uh, hallucinations as well. So we do have identified a couple of them, and those are already under fix. So yeah, as I said, I won't quantify it, and we would, whenever we start, we basically would recommend everyone to just run one of your previous submissions, see if the system is, at least I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone has some or a lot of those kind of submissions which were not approved right away. So your team already knows what kind of issues are there in those, Uh, submissions. You can just run them through this application before you even begin and play around with it. And we can help you if the system has something that's not up to the mark. We can definitely help you tweak those changes. It's pretty easy to reconfigure the system or realign in case if it is missing something. And if there are certain documents that the system is not aware of, even those can be added. And to answer the next question, which was how quickly we can get started. So as soon as I'll just consider, let's say that the all the paperworks are done, we can get started within I would say maximum uh, uh, 2 to 2.5 weeks is all it takes. Just in case if there are some depending on what kind of requirements we finalize at. And the earliest, if you just want it out of the box, we can set it up and hand it over within a week's time. It's as quick as less than a week.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Archit. I believe we went through all the questions that we received, and I'm really thankful to everyone for their participation and for joining us today. It's honestly been such a pleasure having you all here. If you would like to see RegCheck Agent in action for your own submission workflows, please, we encourage you to schedule a personalized demo with our team. You could always reach out to us at info@cloudbyz.com, or you could visit our website www.cloudbyz.com to book a time that works for you. Now, on behalf of Tunir, Christopher, Archit, and the entire Cloudbyz team, thank you so much, and you have a productive rest of your day. Thank you so much.